The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the city lights into long, watercolor streaks of neon and gold. Inside the warmth of the town car, the silence was as thick as the humid night air. My husband, Ethan, had his hand over mine, his thumb stroking my knuckles in a slow, steady rhythm. It was the only thing keeping me grounded. "You don't have to do this, you know," he said softly, his voice a low rumble against the drumming of the rain on the roof. I stared out the window at the ghost of my own reflection. "Yes, I do, Ethan. It's his big night. If I'm not there, it just gives them more ammunition. Karina, the ungrateful daughter. I can already hear Isabella practicing the line." He didn't argue. He knew the intricate, toxic dance of my family as well as I did. He had seen it all for the last 10 years. The subtle snubs, the backhanded compliments, the promises made and then quietly forgotten. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination of it all. A gala celebrating my father, Richard Beaumont, and the launch of his multi-million-dollar family foundation, his legacy. The car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Astoria. Liveried doormen rushed forward with umbrellas. As we stepped out, the wave of noise and light from the ballroom washed over me. The murmur of 100 conversations, the clinking of glasses, the faint, elegant strains of a string quartet. It was a world away from my quiet life of archives and dusty blueprints. It was my father's world. The air inside was thick with the scent of money and lilies, a cold, cloying smell that always clung to my father's tailored suits. Chandeliers dripped crystals of light onto a sea of tuxedos and silk gowns. It was beautiful, opulent, and utterly suffocating. We were 10 minutes late, a calculated 10 minutes. Early enough not to be rude, late enough to avoid the endless receiving line. But of course, my stepmother, Isabella, was lying in wait. She glided towards us, her emerald green dress shimmering, her smile as sharp and perfect as the facets of the diamonds around her neck. "Karina, darling," she cooed, her voice a silken weapon. "Always the artist, never a slave to the clock." She kissed the air beside my cheek, her expensive perfume a suffocating cloud. "And Ethan?" "How lovely to see you. Still enjoying your books?" She made the word books sound like a terminal illness. My half-brother, Leo, trailed behind her, already looking flushed from champagne. He was 25, the golden child, the miracle son born to my father in his late 40s. He carried the effortless confidence of someone who had never wanted for anything. "Hey, sis," he said, giving me a quick, dismissive hug that was more of a shoulder pat. "Glad you could make it." His eyes flickered over my simple, classic navy dress, then to my husband's well-worn but perfectly respectable suit. I saw the flicker of pity in his eyes, the same look he gave the waitstaff. Isabella's gaze was already scanning the room, a general assessing her battlefield. "We've saved you a spot, of course," she said, though her tone suggested it was a great inconvenience. "Table 19. I followed her pointed finger, tipped with a blood-red nail. Table 19 was tucked away in a shadowy alcove, almost completely obscured by a massive marble pillar draped in velvet. It was closer to the swinging doors of the kitchen than to the main stage. The linens were a slightly duller shade of white. The floral centerpiece was a sad, wilting cousin to the explosive bouquets on the VIP tables. It was a table for afterthoughts, for obligations. The VIP table, of course, was front and center, bathed in the golden glow of the stage lights. My father's name card was there, gleaming. Next to him, a seat for Isabella, and next to her, a card that read, Leo Beaumont. The seat that, 3 years ago, my father had promised would be mine, back when the foundation was just an idea we'd sketched out on a napkin together. "We thought you'd be more comfortable over there," Isabella said, her voice dripping with false concern. "With your colleagues." My colleagues? I saw them now, already seated. Dr. Anya Sharma, the brilliant 60-something head of the city's historical society, and Mark Peterson, a kind, perpetually rumpled curator from the Met. They were wonderful people. They were also people who relied on grants and donations from men like my father to keep their institutions running. We were the charity cases, the token academics invited to lend an air of intellectual credibility to my father's raw capitalism. It was a calculated insult, a public branding. You are not one of us. You are one of them. My jaw tightened. I felt Ethan's hand squeeze mine gently, a silent message of support. I glanced at him. His face was calm, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, a deep, steady brown, were watching everything. They missed nothing. I forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Thank you, Isabella. It looks lovely." As we made our way to our designated corner of social Siberia, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses from the main tables followed us like a judgment. I saw Leo lean over and whisper something to my father. My father laughed, a booming sound that filled the room, and clapped his hand on Leo's shoulder. He didn't look at me. Not even once. We were invisible. A ghost at his glorious feast, and I knew, with a sinking certainty that settled like a stone in my gut, that this was only the beginning. The humiliation had only just started. The dinner was an agonizing performance of prestige. Course after course of meticulously arranged food I couldn't taste arrived and was cleared away by silent, efficient waiters. The string quartet played Vivaldi. People laughed and networked and celebrated the greatness of Richard Beaumont. From my shadowed corner, it felt like watching a movie of a life I was supposed to be in, but wasn't. Dr. Sharma, a woman with kind eyes and a sharp mind, leaned toward me under the cover of the polite din. "He promised you that board seat on the foundation, didn't he, Karina?" she whispered, her voice laced with a sympathy that was almost harder to bear than my family's contempt. I could only nod, my throat tight with unshed tears. "He said when he retired, I would carry on the foundation's mission," I murmured, the words tasting like ash. "I built the entire proposal, a program for architectural preservation grants, a scholarship fund for underserved students to study history. My life's work, my passion, condensed into a 100-page document bound in blue leather. I had presented it to him in his study, my heart pounding with hope. He had glanced at the cover, nodded, and said, 'I'll look at it when I have time, sweetheart.' He never mentioned it again." Mark Peterson let out a dry, humorless laugh. "They don't want a mission, my dear. They want a tax shelter with good PR. Historical preservation doesn't look as sexy on a press release as a new business school wing with their name on it." He was right. I knew he was right. Across the room, Isabella was parading Leo from one donor to another, her hand on his arm, introducing him as the future of the Beaumont legacy. The words were like tiny, sharp icicles piercing my skin. Finally, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed, and a single, brilliant spotlight found my father as he approached the podium. A hush fell over the 200 guests. He tapped the microphone, a familiar, theatrical gesture, and smiled that smile, the one I used to think was reserved for me, back when I was a little girl who still believed her father was a king who could do no wrong. "Friends, colleagues, family," he began, his voice smooth and commanding, practiced from 1,000 boardrooms and groundbreaking ceremonies. "Tonight marks the end of one chapter and the beginning of another." The crowd applauded politely. He spoke of his 30-year career, painting a grand mural of his own success. He talked about legacy, about building something that would last for generations. With every word, I felt myself shrink, becoming smaller and smaller in my chair, the way I always did in his presence. Then, his eyes scanned the room, sweeping over the faces of CEOs and city officials until they landed on me, on table 19. His smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes hardened, became cold and deliberate. It was the look he got right before he closed a ruthless deal. As I reflect on my life's work, he continued, his voice resonating with a false sincerity that made my skin crawl, I realize that a legacy isn't just about buildings. It's about the people who carry it forward. It's about children who make you proud, who understand the value of success. He paused, a master of timing, letting the weight of his words settle into the silence. And I've come to believe a simple truth. He raised his glass, the crystal catching the light. Only the children who are a success are truly mine. A wave of laughter and applause rippled through the room. They thought it was a joke, a bit of tough love humor from a titan of industry. But I knew better. This wasn't a joke. This was a scalpel, and he was about to make the first cut. His gaze locked onto mine, a laser beam of contempt. And then he delivered the final killing blow. "Karina," he said, my name a sharp, ugly sound in the elegant room. "You can leave." The air cracked. The polite chatter died. Forks froze midair. Every head in that golden room turned to look at me, the daughter being publicly disowned for the crime of choosing passion over profit. A hot, sharp shame coiled in my stomach and burned its way up my chest. My vision blurred. Cameras, I realized dimly, were still rolling. This humiliation was part of his speech. It was a planned spectacle. My chair scraped against the polished floor as I stood up, my body moving on autopilot. I had to get out. I had to escape the hundreds of pairs of eyes that were now dissecting me, pitying me, judging me. But as I took a step, a hand gently but firmly touched my arm. I looked down. It was Ethan. He was standing too, his face as calm and unreadable as ever. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw not pity, but a quiet, fierce fire that startled me. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper only I could hear. "Not yet." "Thank you for being here with me through this difficult moment. I'd love to know how far this story is reaching." Let me know what city you're watching from in the comments below. It reminds me that I'm not alone. For a long second, I just stared at him, the roaring in my ears drowning out the confused whispers that had started to ripple through the crowd. Not yet? What did he mean, not yet? My world had just been shattered in front of 200 of New York's most influential people. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to flee, to find a dark corner and crumble into a million pieces. But Ethan's grip was firm. It wasn't a restraining hold. It was an anchor in a hurricane. I looked back at my father, who was watching us, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He was enjoying this. He was savoring my pain, my public disgrace. This was his ultimate power play. And in that instant, something inside me shifted. The searing heat of humiliation began to cool, solidifying into something hard and cold and heavy. It was the snap. It was the moment the dam of 1,000 quiet disappointments finally broke. The years of biting my tongue when he called my PhD a cute hobby. The years of smiling politely when Isabella introduced me as Richard's other child. The years of trying to earn a love that was always conditional, always just out of reach. All of it coalesced into a single, sharp point of clarity. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was done. Done trying. done hoping, done being the family's designated failure. My gaze flickered back to Ethan. His face was still calm, but I could now see the calculation in his eyes. He wasn't just comforting me. He was waiting for something. He gave me the slightest, almost imperceptible nod, a look that said, "Trust me, let him finish." So I did. I took a deep, shuddering breath, straightened my spine, and slowly, deliberately sat back down. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a sound of shock, of confusion. My father's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. This wasn't part of his script. I was supposed to run out in tears, confirming my status as the overly emotional, failed daughter he'd painted me as. My refusal to break was an act of defiance he hadn't anticipated. Isabella shot me a look of pure venom from the head table. Leo just looked confused, like a dog who couldn't understand a new trick. As I sat there, under the crushing weight of public scrutiny, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. I was 16, standing in my mother's rose garden. She was sick then, the cancer already hollowing out her cheeks, but her eyes were as bright and fierce as ever. We were talking about my father, about another broken promise. He'd sworn to attend my state history competition and had sent his assistant instead. I had been crying. She had taken my hands in hers, her skin thin as paper. "Karina," she'd said, her voice weak but firm as iron, "your father is a builder. He builds skyscrapers and he builds narratives. And in his narrative, he is always the hero." She paused, taking a breath. "He sees the world as a balance sheet, assets and liabilities. Never forget that. He respects strength, not tears. He will try to make you a footnote in his story, my love." She squeezed my hands. "You must learn to write your own." She coughed, a dry, rattling sound that tore at my heart. "And listen to me, this is important. Whatever you do, whatever you create, whatever you give him, always, always keep the copies, keep the receipts. A woman's work, a woman's contribution, is too easily erased by the men who write the history books. Always keep the copies." The words echoed in my mind now, a ghostly mantra. And I had, in my home office, in a sturdy, fireproof safe, were files, years of files, every draft of the foundation proposal, every email exchange where I'd offered my expertise for free on his development projects. Every invoice for the historical consultants I'd paid out of my own pocket to ensure his projects didn't violate preservation laws. And the most damning file of all, copies of the tuition checks I'd written for Leo's private college, totaling over $200,000, cashed from my inheritance from my mother. My father had claimed business was tight that year, the same year he bought Isabella a yacht for her birthday and named it The Legacy. I had kept it all, not out of malice, but out of a meticulous nature my mother had instilled in me, a historian's habit of documentation. I never thought I would use it. I never wanted to use it, but sitting there with my father's disdain washing over me, I realized my mother hadn't just been giving me advice. She had been giving me armor. She had been giving me a sword. I glanced across the room and saw Ethan subtly check his phone, which he kept below the table. His thumb moved quickly, typing a message. At the VIP table, I noticed a distinguished silver-haired man, Marcus Harrison, a name I vaguely recognized from the business pages, glanced down at his own phone. He read the message, his expression unchanging, and then his eyes met Ethan's for a brief, significant moment. A plan was in motion, a plan I knew nothing about, but a plan I was now, with every fiber of my being, a willing participant in. The pain was still there, a dull, heavy ache behind my ribs, but it was no longer a crippling weight. It was fuel. My father wanted a show. I decided, in that silent, steel-forged moment, that he was going to get one. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. My father, recovering his composure after my unexpected defiance, cleared his throat and continued as if the public execution had been a mere appetizer. "A legacy needs a leader," he boomed, his confidence returning like a tide. "Someone with the drive, the vision, and the Beaumont instinct for success. It is my immense pride and personal joy to announce the new president of the Beaumont Family Foundation, my son, Leo Beaumont." The applause was immediate, though perhaps a little less enthusiastic than before. A current of unease had been introduced into the evening's smooth proceedings. Leo stood up, beaming, and hugged our father. He practically bounced to the podium, radiating an unearned arrogance that made my stomach turn. He looked like a boy who had been handed the keys to a kingdom he didn't know how to rule. "Thank you, Dad," he began, his voice slick and polished, a perfect imitation of our father's public speaking cadence. "I am humbled and honored to carry this incredible legacy forward." I watched him, my new cold clarity turning him into a specimen under a microscope. I saw the way his expensive suit hung just a little too loosely on his shoulders, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He was a boy playing dress-up in a man's world, a world I had helped build for him, a world I had paid for with my mother's money. "For too long," Leo continued, gesturing grandly, "this foundation has been static, looking to the past." He shot a quick, condescending glance in my direction. "My vision is about the future. It's about leveraging our assets for maximum impact. It's about strategic partnerships and dynamic growth." He started outlining his new vision. He spoke of a community architectural revitalization initiative. He talked about creating digital archives to make historical blueprints accessible to young designers. He proposed a scholarship fund for students in urban planning, focusing on sustainable development that honored a neighborhood's history. With every word, the blood in my veins turned to ice. They were my words, my ideas, my soul. He was reciting, almost word for word, the core tenets of the 100-page proposal I had submitted to my father 6 months ago. The proposal my father had dismissed as a sentimental, non-profit drain on resources. The proposal he had called "your little hobby, Karina." The room was filled with murmurs of approval. "Brilliant," I heard someone whisper behind me. "So innovative." I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to keep it from escaping. The memory flooded back with sickening clarity. The night I had explained the entire concept to Leo over dinner at my apartment. Ethan had been away at a conference. I had been so passionate, so full of hope that I could finally make my father proud. I had spread blueprints out on the dining room table, showing him how preserving a building's facade while retrofitting the interior for modern, low-income housing could revitalize a whole neighborhood. He had listened with wide-eyed fascination, asking intelligent questions, making me feel seen and heard. "This is amazing, Karina," he had said, his voice full of what I had mistaken for admiration. "It's genius. You're bridging the past and the future. Dad would be crazy not to do this." He had even asked if he could take a copy of my executive summary to study so he could help advocate for it with our father. He hadn't been admiring me. He hadn't been studying. He had been stealing. He had taken my soul and was now wearing it like a costume. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was staggering. To stand on that stage in front of all these people and present my work, my passion, as his own brilliant idea, and to do it just moments after our father had publicly discarded me like a piece of trash. It wasn't just plagiarism, it was a profound act of erasure. It was them, father and son, a united front, telling me that not only did I not matter, but even the best parts of me, my intellect and my creativity, were only valuable once they were claimed by a man, the chosen son. I looked at Ethan. He was watching Leo with an unnerving stillness, his expression flat, betraying nothing. But I saw his hand, resting on the table, clench slowly into a fist, his knuckles turning white. He knew. Of course he knew. He had read every draft of that proposal. He had listened to me practice my presentation in our living room for weeks. He knew every comma, every footnote. He was my silent witness. And his silence, I was beginning to understand, was not one of weakness. It was the silence of a predator, coiled and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Leo was hitting his stride, his confidence swelling with the room's positive reaction. He was a natural performer, I had to give him that. He had our father's charisma without any of the underlying substance. He clicked a button on the remote in his hand, and the giant LED screen behind him, which had been displaying the Beaumont Foundation's tasteful logo, flickered to life. He was launching into a presentation, complete with sleek graphics and inspirational stock photos of diverse, smiling faces. "My first priority," he announced, his voice ringing with false sincerity, "will be to secure the Foundation's financial future by finalizing our partnership with our lead sponsor, the Vance Investment Group." The name barely registered with me at first. Vance. It sounded familiar, but in a city like New York, it was just another faceless corporate name on another glass tower. I was too consumed with the theft of my work to pay it much attention. Leo gestured to the screen. "Their generous multi-million-dollar commitment is what will power this new vision forward." He was supposed to click to the next slide, a pie chart showing funding allocation that I recognized from my own proposal. But for a split second, his laptop glitched. The presentation software froze. The slide vanished, and for 3 horrifying seconds, his email inbox was mirrored onto the massive screen for the entire ballroom to see. It was an eternity. My mind, trained to scan historical documents for the smallest detail, absorbed it all in an instant. A list of messages, and at the very top, an email he had just opened, the subject line glowing under the stage lights, Vance Agreement. The sender was Arthur Finley, my father's notoriously ruthless corporate lawyer. And the preview text, the first line of the email, was projected in 40-foot letters behind Leo's oblivious smiling head. "Don't worry about their board approval clause. Announce the appointment first. They're just a sponsor, a quiet tech fund. Think of them as an ATM. They don't have any real authority. We'll handle the paperwork later." A low gasp escaped my lips. It was so blatant, so arrogant, a conspiracy to defraud their primary financial backer, spelled out in black and white for anyone with eyes to see. They saw their partner not as a collaborator, but as a wallet to be emptied. The screen flickered again, and the pie chart appeared. Leo, completely unaware of what had just happened, launched into his explanation of the budget. But the damage was done. I had seen it. And I had a feeling I wasn't the only one. I risked a glance at Ethan. His face was a mask of stone. He hadn't flinched, but his eyes were fixed on the stage with a terrifying intensity. He had seen it too. Of course he had. Then I looked over at the VIP table where Marcus Harrison, the silver-haired man, was sitting. He was no longer looking at his phone. He was staring at the stage, his eyebrows furrowed in a deep, thunderous frown. He slowly lifted a glass of water to his lips, his movements deliberate, controlled, but I could see the fury in the tight line of his jaw. He was angry. No, he was furious. The atmosphere in the room had shifted again. The air was buzzing. A few people near the front were whispering to each other, casting confused, excited looks at the stage. They had seen it. Maybe not all of them understood the full implications, but they knew they had seen something they weren't supposed to see. They smelled blood in the water. My father and Isabella, however, were beaming with pride, their faces turned towards their golden boy, completely missing the digital slip-up and the storm it was about to unleash. They were so insulated by their own self-importance, so convinced of their own invincibility, that they couldn't see the cracks forming in the foundation of their perfect evening. Leo finally wrapped up his stolen speech with a flourish. "The future is bright," he declared, "and it starts tonight." The applause was still there, but it was hesitant now, peppered with a new, delicious uncertainty. As Leo walked off the stage, my father stood up, ready to offer the final toast. He was radiating smug satisfaction. This was the pinnacle of his life, the moment he cemented his dynasty. He was completely, blissfully unaware that he wasn't standing on a mountaintop. He was standing on a trapdoor, and someone's hand was hovering over the lever, and that someone was sitting right next to me. My father took the podium again, his chest puffed out like a preening peacock. The brief flicker of unease caused by my defiance had been completely erased by Leo's triumphant speech. In his mind, the succession was complete. The failure had been excised, and the worthy heir had been crowned. The narrative was back under his control. What a son! He bellowed, his voice thick with emotion as he clapped Leo on the back. What a vision! That, ladies and gentlemen, is the Beaumont bloodline at its finest. He gestured for Leo to stand again, and they stood side by side, a portrait of patriarchal success for the flashing cameras. "But Leo's talent isn't just in ideas," my father continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, excited tone, as if he were letting everyone in on a wonderful secret. "It's in action, and I am thrilled to announce that his first act as president has been to secure a landmark strategic partnership." This was it, the final arrogant flourish, the last nail they would hammer into their own coffin, and they were holding the hammer with such pride. Leo has brought to the table an incredible new partner, a European real estate consortium called Innovate Global Properties that will match the Vance Investment Group's funding, effectively doubling the foundation's endowment overnight. A wave of shocked and impressed murmurs swept through the room. This was big news, game-changing news. It cemented Leo's position not just as an heir, but as a rainmaker in his own right. It was the kind of masterstroke that would make headlines, the kind that validated everything my father believed about his family's innate superiority. Isabella, from her seat, looked directly at me. Her lips curved into a slow, cruel smile of pure, unadulterated victory. It was a look that said, "See, this is what a real child accomplishes." Not dusty books and crumbling buildings, real money, real power. You are nothing, less than nothing. I held her gaze, my face a blank canvas. I let her think she had won. I let them all have their moment of supreme, unassailable arrogance. Because I knew, as I saw Ethan subtly nod to Marcus Harrison across the room, that the higher they climb on their mountain of lies, the more devastating the fall would be. The fall was coming. It was seconds away. My father raised his glass high, the champagne sparkling under the stage lights. "So let us toast," he roared, his voice booming with triumph. "To the future, to the Beaumont legacy, and to my son, Leo." The entire room began to rise to its feet, a wave of tuxedos and gowns, their glasses held aloft. It was the final scene of their perfect play, the triumphant crescendo. But just as the first person was about to say cheers, a calm, clear voice cut through the air, sharp as shattering glass. "I would hold that toast if I were you." Every head turned. The voice hadn't come from the stage. It had come from the shadows of Table 19. Ethan was on his feet. He hadn't raised his voice, but it carried a weight, an undeniable authority that commanded instant silence. He stood there, perfectly calm, his hands resting on the back of his chair. All the attention, all the power in that room, which had been focused like a sunbeam on the stage, suddenly pivoted, drawn to the quiet man in the ill-fitting rented tuxedo. My father stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. This was an interruption he could not tolerate. "And who the hell do you think you are?" he snarled, his voice dripping with condescension. Ethan's lips curved into a smile that did not reach his eyes. It was a smile I had never seen before, sharp, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a predator that has finally cornered its prey. "My name is Ethan Vance," he said, his voice echoing in the stunned silence, "and I think you've all been talking about my money." The silence that followed Ethan's statement was absolute. It was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered every other sound in the room. You could have heard a diamond drop on the thick carpet. Ethan Vance. The name hung in the air, charged with impossible, world-altering meaning. My father's face went through a rapid, comical series of emotions. Confusion, then irritation, then dawning, horrified comprehension. "Vance?" he stammered, the name a clumsy stone in his mouth. "Of the Vance Investment Group?" "The very same," Ethan said, his voice still level, still calm. He started walking from the shadows of our table toward the stage, and with every step, it felt like the balance of power in the room was shifting under his feet. He was no longer just Karina's quiet academic husband. He was a force. The entire room seemed to tilt in his direction. "This is absurd," Isabella hissed from her seat, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. It was thin and reedy. You're a history professor or something. You live in a 2-bedroom apartment." The last part was meant to be an insult, a confirmation of our lowly status, but it just sounded pathetic. Ethan paused for a moment and turned to her. "My wife is the brilliant architectural historian," he corrected her gently, a hint of steel in his tone that made her flinch. "I, on the other hand, do dabble in investments, and we like our apartment. The view is excellent." "Dabble?" my father sputtered, finding his voice again. He was trying to reclaim control, to paint Ethan as a fraud, a lunatic. "The Vance Group is a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. It's run by a recluse, a ghost who never makes public appearances. I've met his representatives. You are not him." "You're right about one thing," Ethan said, his eyes locking with my father's. "I do value my privacy. It allows me to see people for who they truly are when they don't think a man of means is in the room." The implication was clear and devastating. "I've been watching you. I know exactly who you are." He had reached the edge of the stage now. He didn't climb the steps. He didn't need to. He commanded the room from the floor, looking up at my father, a dynamic that suddenly made my father look weak and exposed. "Mr. Harrison," Ethan said, turning his head slightly. At the VIP table, Marcus Harrison stood up. His face was grave, his expression one of deep disappointment. "I can confirm," he said, his voice the deep, authoritative baritone of a man used to being obeyed on Wall Street. "This is Ethan Vance, our founder and CEO. And as a member of his board, I must say, I am profoundly disturbed by what I've seen and heard here tonight." If the first revelation had been a shock, this confirmation was an earthquake. The whispers erupted into a roar of disbelief. The man they had dismissed, the man they had seated by the kitchens, was the money. He was the power. He was the ATM they had so casually planned to manipulate and defraud. I watched Isabella's face. The color drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of horror. Leo looked like he was going to be physically sick. He was staring at Ethan as if he'd seen a ghost, the ghost of his own ruined future. My father, however, was a cornered animal. He puffed out his chest, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "This is a private family matter," he blustered, trying to shut it down. "A misunderstanding. You have no right." "I have every right," Ethan interrupted, his voice losing its calm edge and taking on the sharpness of a razor. "I have a 9-figure contract for a start, a contract which, it appears, you have violated in at least 3 different ways in the last 10 minutes. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the reporters and donors who were now listening with rapt attention, their phones held up to record every second of this spectacular implosion. "So, no," Ethan said, his gaze finally returning to my father, cold and unforgiving, "I don't think I will hold this toast. In fact, I think this party is over." My father was speechless. For the first time in his life, Richard Beaumont, the man who always had the last word, the man who could talk his way out of any deal, had nothing to say. He just stood there on the stage, his mouth slightly agape, looking from Ethan to Marcus Harrison and back again. The gears were turning in his brilliant, ruthless mind, but the reality was too immense, too catastrophic to fully process. Ethan didn't wait for him to recover. He nodded to a technician at the side of the room, a man I hadn't even noticed before, who was now poised over a laptop. "Please bring up the document I sent you," Ethan said, his voice ringing with command. File name, Beaumont Agreement. The giant LED screen behind my father flickered. Leo's half-finished presentation vanished, replaced by the crisp, black-and-white text of a legal document. Ethan began to speak, his voice methodical and clear, like a surgeon explaining a precise, fatal operation. "Let's start with Clause 7.3, he said, and a section of the document was instantly highlighted in red on the screen. "The governing board of the foundation must include at least one active, credentialed expert in the field of architectural history or cultural preservation." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You have just appointed a board with 0 such experts. That is breach number 1. He continued, his voice relentless, a metronome of doom. "Now, let's move to Clause 12.1. All appointments to the board, particularly that of the president, must be submitted in writing and approved by the primary sponsor prior to any public announcement." The words, "prior to any public announcement," glowed on the screen like a neon sign of their failure. "You failed to do this. That is breach number 2. Ethan let the weight of his words sink in. The room was utterly silent, save for the frantic clicking of cameras. This was no longer just a family drama. It was a corporate execution, playing out in real time. "And then," Ethan said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal, more dangerous, "there is the matter of simple good faith, the spirit of the agreement." He nodded to the technician again. The contract was replaced by a screenshot. The screenshot of Leo's email inbox that had flashed on the screen moments earlier. This time, it stayed there. The words burned in the air, a digital monument to their arrogance. Quote, "Don't worry about their board approval clause. They're just a sponsor. Think of them as an ATM. They don't have any real authority." To refer to your primary partner as an ATM and to actively conspire to defraud them, Ethan stated, his voice now laced with a cold fury that was more terrifying than any shouting, is not just a breach of contract. It is an act of profound and frankly stupid arrogance. That is breach number 3. The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. The sponsors, the donors, the city officials, they all understood this language. This was the language of betrayal, of bad business, of career-ending, reputation-destroying malfeasance. Leo, who had been frozen beside my father, finally broke. That's out of context," he stammered, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I can explain." "Is it?" Ethan asked, turning his gaze on him. It was the first time he had directly addressed my brother, and the weight of that gaze seemed to make Leo shrink. "Then why don't you provide the context? While you're at it, you can also provide the context for your new vision for the foundation." Another nod to the technician. The screen split into 2. On one side, a page from Leo's presentation outlining the Community Architectural Revitalization Initiative. On the other side, a page from a different document appeared. A proposal for the Beaumont Family Foundation by Dr. Karina Beaumont. My proposal. The text was nearly identical, paragraph after paragraph, word for word. Ethan had even highlighted the matching phrases in yellow. It looked like a student's paper that had been caught by a plagiarism checker. 40%, Ethan said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. That's how much of his proposal your son plagiarized directly from a document written by the woman you just publicly humiliated, a woman whose expertise you were contractually obligated to have on your board. The room erupted. It was a chaotic symphony of gasps, angry shouts, and reporters yelling questions. The entire carefully constructed facade of the Beaumont family, their legacy, their prestige, had been torn down and set on fire in less than 5 minutes, and the man holding the match was the one they never saw coming. The chaos was absolute. My father lunged for the microphone, his face a mask of purple rage. "Security!" he roared, his voice cracking. "Get this man out of here! This is slander! These are doctored documents! Lies!" But no one moved. The security guards stood frozen at the back of the room, their eyes wide, clearly unsure of who was actually in charge. The press, however, surged forward, a pack of wolves sensing blood, their cameras flashing like lightning in the cavernous room, turning the grim scene into a surreal, strobing tableau. "Lies?" Ethan's voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear. "The documents are on the screen, Richard. They have digital timestamps. Are they lying? Is your own son's email, sent from his personal account this afternoon, lying?" Isabella rushed to her husband's side, whispering furiously in his ear, her perfectly manicured hands gripping his arm. "Richard, do something! Call Arthur! Sue him!" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. But there was nothing to do. The proof was irrefutable, displayed on a 40-foot screen for the world to see. Leo was babbling, trying to defend himself to the air, to anyone who would listen. We referenced her work. It was a collaboration. She was helping me," he pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. Dr. Sharma, from our table, let out a loud, incredulous snort that was surprisingly audible in a momentary lull. "That's not collaboration, young man," she called out, her voice ringing with the full weight of her academic authority. "When one person does all the work and another person puts their name on it, we have a word for that. It's called theft, pure and simple." The accusation, coming from a respected scholar and not just my husband, landed with devastating force. Leo flinched as if he'd been struck. He looked around wildly, seeking an ally, but found only contempt and disgust in the faces of the crowd. "This is still a family matter," my father bellowed, trying a different, more desperate tack. He turned on me, his eyes blazing with a lifetime of resentment, seeking the source of his ruin. "You did this. You poisoned him against us. You brought this viper into our family to destroy me." For the first time all night, I felt my own voice return, clear and steady. The shock had worn off. The humiliation had burned away, leaving only a calm, cold certainty. I stood up and walked toward the stage, stopping next to Ethan, my hand finding his. We were a united front. I looked up at the man who was my father. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm, and I held the microphone Ethan offered me. "I didn't destroy you. Your own choices did. Your greed, your cruelty." I looked over at my shaking, pathetic brother. "And your son's incompetence." That was when the final, unexpected blow landed, and it didn't come from Ethan or me. It came from the side of the stage, where a stooped, elderly man was now walking toward a different microphone, one set up for guest speakers. It was Mr. Davis, our family's lawyer for over 40 years. He was a quiet, unassuming man I had always known to be fiercely, almost blindly loyal to my father. "Richard, stop," Mr. Davis said, his voice frail but carrying an immense weight of sorrow and authority. "It's over." My father stared at him, bewildered. This was a betrayal he could not comprehend. "Davis, what are you doing? You work for me." "No, Richard," the old lawyer said, shaking his head slowly, his disappointment palpable. "For 40 years, I have worked for your family. And my primary duty was always to uphold the wishes of my first client from this family, your late wife, Eleanor." My breath caught in my throat. "My mother." Mr. Davis reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thin, pale blue envelope tied with a faded white ribbon. "Your wife," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "left this letter in my care upon her death, with a single solemn instruction. I was to read it publicly if I ever believed, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the foundation she helped create was being used for purposes contrary to its original mission of community and preservation, if it ever became a monument to one man's ego." He looked my father dead in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "Richard, I believe that time has come." The room fell into a stunned, profound silence. This was no longer just about contracts and plagiarism. This was a reckoning. It was about a ghost, a matriarch, returning from the past through her most trusted confidant to deliver her final judgment. Mr. Davis untied the ribbon, opened the letter, and a story I never knew, a truth I had only ever felt in my bones, was about to be told. Thank you for staying with me. If you've walked through this fire with me, you are truly a patient and wonderful person. Please like this video and comment with the number 1 below so I know you're still here. Your support is an incredible encouragement. Comment 1 and then listen to what happened next. Davis put on his half-moon spectacles, his hands shaking ever so slightly as he unfolded the brittle, age-yellowed paper. The pale blue stationery was my mother's favorite. I could almost smell her faint, familiar scent of gardenias and old paper, a scent that for a moment transported me back to her sunlit study. The entire ballroom, from the reporters in the front with their cameras poised, to the waiters at the back standing motionless with their trays, leaned in, holding their collective breath. "To whom it may concern," Mr. Davis began to read, his voice gaining strength and clarity with each word, as if he were channeling my mother's own quiet resolve. The letter was dated just 3 months before she passed away. If you are hearing these words, it means my deepest fears have come to pass. The Beaumont Foundation, which I co-founded with my husband, was intended to be a gift to this city, a way to preserve the beauty and history that Richard so often seeks to demolish in the name of progress. I saw my father flinch as if struck. It was a direct hit, a truth he had spent decades burying under layers of self-aggrandizing PR and billion-dollar deals. The letter continued, every word a careful, deliberate indictment. I have always known my husband is a man of vast ambition. Ambition is not a sin, but when it is untethered from integrity, when it prioritizes image over substance, it becomes a destructive force. I fear that without my influence, the foundation will become nothing more than a vehicle for his vanity and a tool to further enrich our family, rather than the community it was meant to serve. Mr. Davis paused and looked up, his gaze sweeping over my father, Isabella, and Leo, who looked like wax figures melting under the hot lights. She knew, he said softly, a statement of fact, not surprise, before returning to the letter. I have one daughter, Karina. She is my heart. She is the keeper of my soul. She has my passion for history, my eye for beauty, and a soul filled with a kindness and integrity her father often mistakes for weakness. It is my dying wish that she, and she alone, guide the Foundation's mission after I am gone. The initial endowment comes from my family's trust, not from Beaumont Properties, and its purpose is to fund her vision. She is the true inheritor of its spirit. A sob escaped my lips, a sound I couldn't hold back. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed all night began to stream down my face, not of sorrow, but of a deep, aching validation. All these years, I had felt like a disappointment, a pale shadow of my father's expectations. But my mother had seen me. She had known. She had protected me, even from beyond the grave. The letter wasn't finished. I have made my wishes known to Richard, Mr. Davis read on, his voice filled with the weight of my mother's foresight. He has promised me he will honor them, but I know my husband. His promises can be as fleeting as the market. Therefore, I have entrusted this letter to my dear friend and lawyer, Mr. Davis, as a failsafe. Should my daughter ever be cast aside, should the Foundation's purpose be corrupted by vanity or greed, I ask that this letter be read. Let it serve as a testament to the truth. The final lines were a direct address to me, and as Mr. Davis read them, it felt as if she were whispering them in my ear. My dearest Karina, if you are hearing this, know that I am with you. Do not let his world of steel and glass make you small. Your work matters. Your heart matters. You are, and always have been, my greatest legacy. All my love, Eleanor. Mr. Davis folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. The silence in the room was no longer just stunned. It was reverent. It was the sound of a profound moral truth being revealed. The narrative my father had so carefully crafted for 30 years, that of the self-made titan, had been rewritten. He was a man who had broken a promise to his dying wife and attempted to steal his own daughter's inheritance. He looked broken, smaller than I had ever seen him. The fury was gone, replaced by a hollow, gray emptiness. Isabella was staring at the letter in Mr. Davis's hand as if it were a venomous snake that had just bitten her. But Ethan wasn't done. The emotional blow had landed, but the final, practical execution was yet to come. He stepped forward again, his face grim. The letter makes the ethical bankruptcy of this situation clear, Ethan said, his voice cold and final. But I'm afraid it gets worse. He looked directly at Leo, who seemed to be trying to melt into the floorboards. "Let's talk about that landmark strategic partnership you announced, Leo. Innovate Global Properties." Ethan paused. "My firm did a little digging this afternoon. It's amazing what you can find out with the right resources." He nodded to the technician one last time. The screen changed to show a series of corporate registration documents and international bank records. "This consortium," Ethan said, his voice dripping with contempt, "was registered 2 months ago in a Caribbean tax haven. Its listed director is an associate from your old fraternity, and its entire registered capital is $10,000. It's a shell corporation, a ghost. It exists only on paper." He let that sink in before delivering the final, devastating sentence. "It's a front you created, Leo, to funnel the foundation's money, my money, into your own pockets. It's not a partnership. It's felony wire fraud." Fraud. The word echoed in the silent ballroom like a gunshot. It was no longer about a broken contract or a stolen idea or a broken promise. It was a crime, a federal offense, the kind of thing that came with lawyers and indictments and prison sentences. Leo made a choking sound, his face the color of ash. "No, that's not true. It's a startup." His voice trailed off into a pathetic whimper. He knew he was caught. The web of his lazy, arrogant lies had been torn apart. Then something else happened, another piece of Ethan's meticulous plan clicking into place. Julian Croft, a name I recognized as a longtime business rival of my father's, suddenly stood up from a table near the front. He was a handsome, silver-haired man my father had publicly gloated about bankrupting a decade ago in a hostile takeover. He looked directly at my father, his eyes gleaming with the bright, hard light of long-delayed vengeance. "Actually, it is true," Julian said, his voice ringing with satisfaction. "Because my new private equity firm was asked to conduct due diligence on Innovate Global Properties by Mr. Vance this morning. It's a complete fabrication, a child's attempt at a corporate cutout. And we've already forwarded our findings, along with the sworn affidavit, to the district attorney's office." The final piece clicked into place. The silver-haired man, Marcus Harrison, was on Ethan's board. The rival, Julian Croft, was his partner, his agent of vengeance. Ethan hadn't just reacted tonight. He had been preparing. He had seen the red flags in their dealings. He had anticipated their arrogance. And he had built an army to protect me. My father finally crumpled. He sank into the plush chair on the stage, his big frame seeming to deflate, all the arrogance and power draining out of him like air from a balloon. He stared blankly into the distance, a man watching his own kingdom burn to the ground. Isabella was frantically whispering to him, but he didn't seem to hear her. Her world was on fire, too. I walked to the edge of the stage, my tears finally dry. I looked at the man who had created me and then tried to uncreate me. The rage was gone. The pain was gone. All I felt was a vast, empty pity for a man so rich in wealth and so impoverished in spirit. Ethan handed me his microphone without a word. He wanted the power to be mine. He wanted me to be the one to close the book. I took it. My hand was steady. I looked out at the crowd, at the flashing lights, at the sea of shocked faces. This was my moment, not for revenge, but for truth. "Effective immediately," I said, my voice clear and carrying, resonating with an authority I never knew I possessed. "The Vance Investment Group hereby withdraws all current and future funding from the Beaumont Family Foundation. Furthermore, as the legal heir to the Foundation's original endowment, as per the will of Eleanor Beaumont, I am assuming control of its board, effectively immediately. The foundation is not defund, it is under new management. The reporters surged, a chaotic mass of bodies and yelling. Mr. Beaumont, do you have a comment on the fraud allegations? Leo, will you be stepping down? Karina, what will you do now? Amidst the chaos, I looked straight at my father one last time. You once said that only the children who are a success are truly yours. I took a breath, letting the finality of my next words settle in my own soul before I spoke them aloud. Then, from now on, I am not yours. I am my mother's daughter. I placed the microphone gently on the podium and walked off the stage. I didn't look back. Ethan was there, waiting for me. He took my hand, his grip warm and solid, a silent promise. As we walked toward the exit, through the stunned, parting crowd, the golden letters of the Beaumont Family Foundation sign on the screen flickered and went dark, plunging the stage into shadow. His empire was gone. Ours was just beginning. The 6 weeks that followed the gala were a whirlwind of headlines and legal proceedings. The Beaumont scandal was the story that wouldn't die. It was a perfect storm of family drama, financial fraud, and public humiliation, and the city devoured it. The New York Post had a field day with headlines like Beaumont's Bust and Daddy's Dearest Deception. My father was forced into a disgraced retirement. The foundation, under my new control, was temporarily suspended as we conducted a full audit, rooting out years of his vanity projects and Isabella's extravagant expenses. He and Isabella sold their Fifth Avenue penthouse and retreated to a smaller home upstate, vanishing from the social world they had once ruled. Leo, facing irrefutable evidence of wire fraud, was arrested. He made bail, but his life as he knew it was over. His face, once beaming from the society pages, was now a sullen, haggard mask in grainy tabloid photos taken outside the courthouse. Isabella, I heard through Mr. Davis, had filed for divorce. Her loyalty, it turned out, was directly tied to the Beaumont net worth. A sinking ship, after all, is no place for a woman whose entire identity was tied to the captain's status. And us? Ethan and I were quiet. The storm raged around us, but in our small apartment overlooking the Hudson, there was peace. Ethan's identity as the phantom COO of Vance Investments was out, of course, and our lives changed in some ways. We had to get a new phone number to stop the endless calls from reporters and opportunistic stockbrokers, but at its core, our life remained the same. We still made dinner together, still read side by side in the evenings, still found solace in the simple, steady rhythm of our life together. He was still just Ethan, the man I loved. One rainy Tuesday, I was in my home office, surrounded by the comforting scent of old books and paper. I was finally sorting through my mother's personal effects, boxes that had been in storage for years, boxes I hadn't had the heart to open. In a small leather-bound journal, I found an entry from the year before she died. "I've started the initial funding for the foundation," she wrote in her elegant, sloping script. "Richard thinks it's his idea, his legacy. I let him. A man's ego can be a useful tool if you know how to direct it. But in my heart, this is for Karina. It is my gift to her, a place where her gentle, brilliant soul can do good in the world long after I am gone." The quiet tears came again, but this time they were not of pain or humiliation. They were tears of gratitude, of being truly, completely seen by the one person whose opinion had ever truly mattered. Ethan came in and wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder and reading the passage over my head. "She was a smart woman," he said softly. "She knew exactly who you were, and she knew who he was." "Why didn't you ever tell me who you were?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. It was a question I hadn't dared to ask until now, in the quiet aftermath. He was quiet for a moment, turning me around to face him. Because I fell in love with Karina Beaumont, the brilliant, passionate historian who could spend an entire day arguing about the structural integrity of a 19th century aqueduct, he said, a gentle smile on his face. Not Karina Beaumont, the daughter of a real estate tycoon. I wanted you to be with me, Ethan Vance, the slightly boring history buff, not the CEO of an investment firm. I wanted to be sure. He kissed my temple. And I never wanted you to think I was trying to save you. I knew you always had the strength to save yourself. You just needed the right moment to see it. A few days later, Mr. Davis called. The audit was complete. It was messy, but my mother's initial endowment, the seed money she had put into the foundation, had been kept in a separate trust. A trust that named me as the sole beneficiary and director in the event of moral or legal failure of the existing board. It was mine, her gift, untouched and waiting. It's time to build, Karina, Ethan said that evening, his eyes shining. And so we did. We dissolved the Beaumont Family Foundation. That name was toxic now, a monument to greed and ruin. We would build something new, something pure, something that was truly hers. We called it the Eleanor Foundation. The Rose Hill Ballroom was quiet now. 6 months after that fateful night, the gilded chairs and crystal glasses were gone, replaced by a simple, long oak table. There were no chandeliers casting a cold, judgmental light, just the soft afternoon sun streaming in through the tall arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. This is where he told me to leave, I thought, a distant, painless memory. Now it's where we're signing our first grant. Our first board meeting for the Eleanor Foundation was small and purposeful. There was me as president, Ethan as the head of the investment committee working to grow my mother's legacy, Mr. Davis offering his legal counsel pro bono, his eyes twinkling with a newfound peace, and Dr. Anya Sharma and Mark Peterson, the first 2 board members I had invited, their faces bright with hope. We deliberately set up our meeting in the exact corner where table 19 once stood. A reminder, I had said, of where we came from and who we are here to serve. The fallout for the Beaumonts had been total. Leo took a plea deal and was serving an 18-month sentence in a low-security prison. My father was forced to sell off most of his properties to cover the legal fees, divorce settlement, and federal fines. I read in the paper that he was living in a condo in Florida. A week after our first meeting, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered. "You won," a rough, diminished voice said on the other end. It was my father. His voice, once a booming instrument of power, was now thin and reedy. "Are you happy now?" The question hung in the air. Was I happy? "I didn't win, Dad," I told him, the title feeling foreign and ill-fitting on my tongue. I just stopped playing a game that was rigged from the start. He was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry," he finally choked out. The words sounded like they were being torn from him, rusty and unused. He asked to meet, said he wanted to apologize properly. I thought of my mother. I thought of the 16-year-old girl crying in the garden. And I knew what true accountability looked like. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about change. "I'll meet you," I said calmly, "after you complete 6 months of therapy to understand why you treat people the way you do, and after you issue a public apology, not to me, but to the historical preservation community you disdained for so long." He hung up. I knew he would never do it. And for the first time in my life, I was completely okay with that. I didn't need his apology anymore. His validation was a currency I no longer dealt in. My worth was not listed on his balance sheet. Tonight, as I look around this beautiful, quiet room, I see the faces of the first recipients of our grants. A small community group saving a historic theater in the Bronx. A young graduate student digitizing priceless city archives. Their work is not flashy. It won't make headlines. But it is real. It is important. It is my mother's dream come to life. On the wall behind me, where the glittering Beaumont sign once hung, there is now a simple, engraved wooden plaque. It reads, "For every voice that was told it was too quiet." My father told me to leave his table, and I did. I walked away from the crushing weight of his expectations, from the shadow of his ego, and I walked toward the light of my own purpose. We didn't need a seat at their table. We built our own. And at this table, everyone has a voice. Everyone is welcome. Thank you for listening to my story to the very end. I am truly grateful for your time and your presence. Please comment with the letter A so I know you are one of the special few who finished this journey with me. If you have any feelings you'd like to share, please write them down. And please continue to explore the other stories on our channel.